Alright, now we're going to talk about garment construction. Marvelous Designer actually has the capacity to work with quads and export quads, and I will be showing you how to do that momentarily. If you're doing something like I just showed you that's a quick and dirty draped object for a scene, you don't need to worry about this as much, but if we're going to be creating something that might be for a product, of course this matters more. Now there are different schools of thought as to the best base pose, because you can actually start out with Genesis through Female's arms bent like the MD avatar, and just do a morph target of the base pose before you export from MD. I don't choose to do that, but I am also not a clothing maker by trade. Just keep in mind that it's an option. In this case, I'm going to work with just the exported OBJ of Genesis through Female. It needs to be in the 0 pose, or your chosen arms down pose, and it does need to be zeroed of all morphs. So I've cleared my Marvelous Designer scene of all avatars, and I'm going to import that 0 morph base as an avatar. It doesn't matter if it's at base resolution for this purpose. There we go. You can see that. Now, Marvelous Designer's default avatars have things called attachment points that help you to bend the pattern around the figure and make the sim easier. Of course, when we import an OBJ, by default, we don't have that. We can add attachment points by clicking on the figure while we have this A point option up. You can click Add and then Arrangement Point, and you have an option over here for creating arrangement points on the figure. I'm not going to do that today. That's a different topic. It takes some time. People have uploaded arrangement point sets or attachment sets for Genesis 3 male and female. I have not been able to get them to work with mine, but they are out there on ShareCG if you'd like to have a look. For the moment, I've got my Genesis 3 female, and I've got my pattern screen over here. I'm going to start with a simple tunic type dress. So first I'm going to go here to this button at the top that says Polygon, and I'm going to left click and drag to create points, and I'm just going to start drawing a connect the dots sort of dress here. I'm going to do one long line down the middle for sewing purposes. There don't need to be a lot of lines there. And I'm just going to add dots to places where I need more smoothness, like along that hem. I'm making this simple fitted dress here. In this part, it does help if you know a little bit about sewing, because these are a bit like pattern pieces. But you can see I've drawn half of a dress there. And then I'm going to go up here to the Edit Pattern button, or hit Z, click on that, and right click and choose Copy. And now I'm going to right click and choose Mirror Paste, and it puts down an identical pattern piece. And I'm going to keep doing that, copying and pasting, to create the front and back pieces of my garment. Again, this is a simple garment without a lot of shirring or ruching or other more complicated things, which take a little more explanation. Now I've got 4 pieces. I'm going to go up here and hit Sync, and it's going to put them into my scene. I'm going to put 2 of them back behind the character, and when I do that I'm going to flip the normals on both of those. So after I've dragged them around using the widgets, I'm going to right click on one and choose Flip Normal. There we go. I'm also going to click each of these and choose Quadrangulate, because I want them to be in quads and not the triangles that Marvelous Designer prefers to work with by default. There we go. And again, remember, this is now my UV over here as well. So you can arrange these in any placement or shape that you want to create a different UV. If you want it rectangular, you can drag them up to the top, or whatever you'd like to do. But in the meantime, I'm going to arrange them as close to the figure as possible to make sewing as easy as possible. Sewing being the next topic that we are going to cover here in this tutorial. You want them to not clip with the figure as well. So now I'm going to sew these pieces together, and I'm going to do that using the buttons here up top. This one says segment sewing, or you can hit the N key, and this you have to do from the pattern screen. You can tell which pattern piece you're looking at because when you click on it in the 3D window over here, a blue dot appears on it in this screen. So when I want to sew this front piece to this back piece, I can tell that I want this center one and this left one. So I'm going to sew those shoulders together first by left-clicking on one shoulder seam and then left-clicking on the other one. And now it has drawn that seam in the 3D window so that I can see it. And I'll do the same thing with all of the seams that I want to create here. I'm not going to sew these areas because that's actually the armholes, of course. Eventually, I will get a crossed seam like this. And we have to fix that or it won't look right when it simulates. So I'm going to go back to the pattern window here, and I'm going to click on this button up here that looks like a sewing machine with an arrow next to it. And then I'm going to right-click on that seam we created and click Reverse Sewing. And it will fix that issue. As you can see, that's clipping with the figure a little bit, so I'm going to drag the pattern pieces vertically downwards to get rid of that problem. That caused a little bit of clipping in the breast there in the front, but that's not a huge issue compared to the other one. I'm going to continue clicking these different things with the sewing tool on there and reversing the sewing wherever necessary. And I'm going to continue sewing down the sides. Okay, there we go. Now I've got all my seams in place, and I'm going to go up here and hit Simulate, or hit the spacebar, and it's going to sew that dress together around my character. There it is. You can see it's not perfectly symmetrical in the sim because it's a little irregular, as things are when gravity is applied to them. You can see I've messed up the armholes a little bit in the shape of them. The great thing about Marvelous Designer is that I can actually go and fix that a little bit after the sim has been run by hitting the Edit Pattern, or Z button, and then I can go and click on any dot or any line of the pattern and drag it around to a better location for that without disturbing the seams. So I'm going to drag these armholes in a little bit and get rid of those odd points that I've created. There's that. Now, if you're used to rigging in DAZ Studio, you know that what I've created here is actually not optimal because it goes out onto the arms too much. So the other thing that I can do is drag these pieces further in toward her neck area so that it covers less of the arm. Because you might want a sleeve to cover some of the arm, but you don't really want the central part of the garment to do that when you're working with rigging for DAZ Studio. You have to do more JCMs if you do that, if that's the case. This is by no means perfect. It's still a bit crude, but at least it's a functional garment that we've created. Alright, I've tweaked the shape of this a little more. It's still crude, and it's certainly not DAZ ready, but you can see that I've drawn out the width of the lower parts of these patterns to make the skirt wider and to give it more of those folds, and I've dragged it down to be a little bit longer. Now I'm ready to export, and I've turned off the Simulate button up here. So I'm going to go with File, Export, OBJ, and I'm going to just overwrite my earlier drape experiment. It says thick option is not available when exporting quad meshes, which is fine because that means we have quads for everything. And I'm going to uncheck base OBJ shape up here so I don't export Genesis 3 female again. And I've got single object, weld, and centimeters DAZ Studio, and I'm going to click OK. Then I'm going to go to DAZ Studio and import that OBJ. And there it is. Now, it doesn't have a texture or anything on it, but if I go to the wire texture shaded draw style, you can see my nice quads. It has some different shapes of quads on it to facilitate the shape of the different folds and wrinkles, which is good. We want that. If you decide you absolutely don't like that, there are programs like ZBrush that will allow you to remesh and get rid of that, but I don't really recommend it, because that will kill your nice UV. And if I go to the default camera up here and click on UV view, you can see my lovely UV that came out of a Marvelous Designer. It came right out of that pattern screen. which makes this very easy to texture. So then I will go back to default camera view. There we are. And you'll notice that it gave it an unacceptable name here as well. So if you go up to the Geometry Editor tool, or Alt-Shift-G, and the Tool Settings tab, you can see the names of the face groups, of which there is only one because it's not rigged, and the surfaces, which is our inappropriate name. So double click on that, and I can call this dress cloth, or whatever you like, just as long as it's not that default exported material. And then I can go to, in my case, scripts, because I've set it as a custom action, and add the Iray Uber base. And now I'm ready to rig in texture. So first I'm going to create a base rig with the transfer utility. I sell templates as well, but for today let's start with the very most basic, wherein I've started the transfer utility. By clicking on its icon, I'm going to select Genesis 3 Female as the source, and my dress, currently called Drape, as the target. Then I will click Fit to Source Figure and add Smoothing Modifier and just accept. This fits the dress rigidly to the thighs and shins. That is not a method that I highly recommend, but there are still artists that do it. In this case, that means that when I move the legs of Genesis 3 Female, the dress will move with them. And that's not going to look right. It actually needs a lot of tweaking. But what you can also do is to create a joint-controlled morph to fix that drape. So this dress currently has the same vertex order as the one that you exported from Marvelous Designer. It is the same object. So if you click on Genesis 3 Female and currently used, and make sure that in the parameters options you have Show Hidden Properties checked, you will see this PJCM thigh side 85 there at 100%. So that's actually a JCM that Genesis 3 Female has that has actually been conveyed into the dress as well. It's not doing much, and it certainly isn't going to fix that drape, but we can fix that very easily. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do, I've renamed my test dress to something that's more correct for submission to DAZ. It needs to have my vendor name, the name of the object, and the name of the figure that it's for. But for now I'm going to hide that and just export Genesis 3 Female as the name of the currently active JCM, which is PJCM thigh side 85L here with some underscores. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to export as that to OBJ. And then in Marvelous Designer, I loaded that as a morph target by clicking on Genesis 3 Female and saying import OBJ, selecting that and choosing load as morph target and DAZ Studio centimeters as the size preset, and it simmed the dress into that position. So now I can export that dress again as an OBJ, and it will have the same vertex order, and it will work as a morph. So I'm going to overwrite that so that it has the correct name. Make sure I uncheck the base OBJ shape so that I don't export Genesis 3 Female as well. And now I should be able to load that as the JCM. But alright, back in DAZ Studio, I'm going to turn on the visibility of my test dress here. And under currently used, you can see that the current version of that JCM is there. I'm going to go to Genesis 3 Female and General and turn base joint correctives to off. And make sure that's off on this. I've been playing around with it, which is why the dial is not at 0. There we go. So it's important that that base joint correctives button be off, or the JCM won't load and overwrite correctly. So now I'm going to start Morph Loader Pro by clicking on this icon that looks like a bicep with a letter P on it. I'm going to click Choose Morph Files, and I'm going to click that exported file that we just exported from Marvelous Designer. I'm going to set Reverse Deformations to Yes by right-clicking on it and then left-clicking the word Yes. Then I'll right-click the words Make Unique and left-click Deltas Only. And then I'm going to click Accept. Nothing visibly happens yet. So the way that I'm going to do that is through the Property Hierarchy tab. So I'm going to go to Property Hierarchy and double-click on the test dress to expand it. And under Parameters, there's a huge list of things, but I can find thigh side 85L there, or up here in the text filter box I can type thigh side, and it will show only things with that name. There we go. And I'm going to check the controllers heading. There are no controllers. So I want that to be controlled by the side movement of the thigh. So I'm going to go to the left thigh bend on the dress there, and I'm going to find the side-to-side dial, and I'm going to drag it over and drop it onto the first stage of that morph. And it is freaked out in the window there, but I'm actually going to set that to 0.016. That's much closer to what we want. It doesn't look right because it's at 144%. So I'm actually going to go back to that morph and set it to a maximum of 100% and make sure use limits is checked. And the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 100. There we go. So now when I move Genesis 3 female's leg back and forth, my JCM will go on and off. And the iteration there is not perfect. It's interacting with some other things, and we would have to fiddle with it a bit when we add all the other joint-controlled morphs, but at least you can see this is a way that you can add joint-controlled morphs using a Marvelous Designer simulation. And they look pretty realistic compared to a morph that you made yourself by sculpting. As always, don't forget to save your work, going to File, Save As, Support Asset, Figure Prop Assets, and then give your item a name. And then it will ask for the asset directory and your vendor name, product name, and item name, and make sure you click Accept so that you don't lose your work when you're done with this process. You can also save just the JCM once you've already saved the product file by going to File, Save As, Support Asset, Morph Assets, and that dialog will pop up, but it won't right now because I'm not actually going to save this terrible test dress that I've made. That's it for our second tutorial on Marvelous Designer. Thank you for watching, and happy rendering!